This section was an absolute roller coaster of strategy and sheer brutality. The Han's amphibious assault on Modun's camp felt meticulously planned yet savagely executed. That impenetrable iron tortoise formation, the relentless rain of fire arrows, utterly chilling efficiency. Watching the Nomad's home descend into fiery chaos, their desperation culminating in that insane, raw lasso pole tactic against the armored tiger guard, was genuinely gripping. It starkly highlights the horrifying asymmetry of their warfare. Even the Han's bizarre non-combat casualties, gored by cattle, bitten by sheepdogs, underscore the messy, unpredictable reality behind their polished military machine. Modun's simmering fury turning into a calculated pivot, adopting the clever Durantai, and tasking him specifically with capturing Han artisans feels like a significant, deeply dangerous shift. Forget just territory. The war just got personal, aimed straight at the Han's technological core. How far will this desperate hunt for knowledge push both sides? 3 days later, You Zhi and the others had practically worn their necks out waiting. Zurin and Gesang, those two long-suffering salt-run escorts, finally appeared at the temporary camp with that damnable load of white salt. These two fellows had been on edge the entire journey, playing dead by day and traveling under the cover of darkness by night. After more than half a month, they had wasted away, nearly thin as salt pillars themselves. When the heavy bags of white salt were handed over to You Zhi, everyone let out a long whoosh of relief, as if they'd just surfaced for air, feeling like they'd gotten a new lease on life. Not far off, Arslan hadn't given up. He was still lying low. He was stunned, nearly cross-eyed, when he suddenly spotted a small tribe, complete with families and large herds of livestock, trotting over eagerly to join the Han merchant caravan. What the hell was going on? He quickly took a few scouts and sneaked over stealthily to take a look. That one look nearly made Arslan die of fury on the spot. He saw those herdsmen cheerfully unloading bulging sacks from the backs of their own animals. The Han tribesmen nimbly took the sacks and stacked them neatly onto the empty wagons. And as if working wasn't enough, they kept glancing over towards Arslan's scouts every now and then, whistling loudly with infuriating smugness, their faces practically screaming, "Mad yet? Huh? Mad yet? Ha ha ha." Saren, who had escorted the salt, had the loudest voice. He bellowed triumphantly towards Arslan's distant scouts. "Look at this. We number almost 2,000 now, with 1,500 capable cavalrymen alone. Even if that old rascal Modun were standing right here, he could only watch us load the salt with his eyes wide open. Would he dare make a move? Not even if he had twice the nerve." Yili of the 1,000 sheep, the leader of the newly submitted herdsman, felt his blood boil with excitement at the sight. He sidled up to You Zhi. "Commander Yu, we have the salt, and we have enough men. Shouldn't we go test our skills? Just coming out for a stroll and going back like this, it's too humiliating. Wearing such fine gear and not firing a single arrow, it's damn frustrating." You Zhi had felt the itch himself. When he first saw the reinforcements, he too had wanted to clash with Arslan. But after 3 days of deliberation, understanding the situation with the families and baggage they were responsible for, he immediately suppressed that impulse. "Forget it, brother." You Zhi patted Yili's shoulder. "Don't get any funny ideas. We have plenty of men, sure, but the enemy is all unencumbered light cavalry, faster than rabbits. And us? We have to protect the goods and watch over the women and children. If a fight breaks out, we'd definitely be thrown into confusion, turning a good situation bad. Listen to me. Getting these animals and this white salt back safely is a huge accomplishment. Don't worry, when we get back to the chief, there will be plenty of rewards for you." Yili thought it over and saw the logic, so he could only nod. "All right, so we pull out now?" "Right. Full contingent, move out heading home. At you." Zhi's command, the merchant caravan loaded with white salt, joined by the submitted cavalry and Gesang's tribe, formed a mighty procession of nearly 4,000 people. Herding countless livestock, they set off on the road home, singing and celebrating along the way. The scene was one of joyous clamor, almost like gongs clanging and firecrackers popping. Well, maybe no firecrackers, but the atmosphere was similar. Left behind, Arslan could only watch helplessly as the massive contingent disappeared from view, his cheeks puffed with anger, his lungs feeling ready to explode. He wanted to go pick a fight, but his strength just didn't allow it. In the end, bottling up a bellyful of fury, he could only slink away dejectedly with his men. He swore inwardly, "I'll definitely report them when I get back." Those useless fools responsible for searching the salt convoys, where were their eyes, letting so much white salt slip right under their noses? However, a few days later, when all 3 detachments Modun had sent out returned empty-handed and, crestfallen, Modun heard the results but didn't lose his temper much, nor did he punish anyone. Instead, the bombshell he subsequently dropped, that their main camp had been raided by the Han tribe, instantly threw Arslan and his men into an uproar. Now, fear and anger surged up all at once. How could they not be furious? Most of those who had stayed behind in the tribe had managed to save their families and livestock. But what about these warriors who were out, fighting for the tribe? Their wives, children, cattle, sheep, and horses. Most had been packed up and plundered, wholesale by the Han tribe. The results of the Tiger Guard's home raiding operation this time were glorious. Over 2,000 killed, though mostly the old, weak women and children, with only 400 or 500 able-bodied men among them. Over 3,000 people captured, and livestock seized numbering a staggering 100,000 head or more. Where did these spoils of war come from? Mostly acquired free of charge from the homes of these unlucky bastards like Arslan who were away on campaign. Take Arslan, for example. His few capable sons had come out with him, but his daughters-in-law, grandchildren, and entire family fortune had been wiped out in one go by the Tiger Guard. Even his tents were burned to ashes. Livestock? Not a single animal was left. Overnight, they had all become homeless vagrants. Wasn't it natural they were angry enough to want to eat someone? The atmosphere in the large tent of the temporary camp was heavy enough to drip water. Arslan knelt down with a thud, and behind him a crowd of cavalry leaders who had lost everything knelt in unison. "Chief, please lead us to take revenge on the Han tribe, to take back our people and livestock. I, Arslan, volunteer to be the vanguard, to lead the charge." Modun's face was ashen as he barked sharply. "You lead the charge with what? Your head? Aren't our losses disastrous enough already?" Arslan stiffened his neck and retorted defiantly. "So are we just not going to avenge this?" "Revenge, of course, we'll take revenge." Modun's eyes were dark and grim. "But not now. Our strength has been greatly damaged. The urgent priority now is to survive and recover. The tribe's survival comes first. Seek a decisive battle. With the Han tribe now, that's courting death. Instead of wasting time on that, we should first raid a few unlucky small tribes to replenish our population and supplies. Lost women, lost livestock, just go raid some more. The grasslands lack many things but never things to plunder. When we've licked our wounds and regained our strength, then it won't be too late to settle the score with the Han tribe. With interest." The words were crude, but the reasoning was sound. Hearing this, the leaders in the tent felt it made sense. They had no choice. Life on the grasslands was just that simple and brutal. Herding, hunting, raiding. The weak were prey for the strong. If you were strong, you raided others. If you were weak, others raided you. This was the rule passed down by their ancestors, something everyone was used to. Thus, Modun's strategic relocation plan was immediately passed unanimously. After resting for 2 days, the various forces poured out like hungry wolves and began a frenzied sweep of the surrounding unfortunate small tribes. For a time, the entire southern grassland was thrown into chaos, filled with cries and screams, as countless people and livestock were killed or injured. Meanwhile, several hundred li away, the Han army's main camp was an ocean of joy, a stark contrast like night and day. First, the fleet returned to the new city camp escorting several thousand captives. Then, You Zhi's merchant caravan, along with the submitted cavalry, also returned safely, bringing the white salt valued by the Shin tribe at 10,000 head of cattle and horses, plus an extra 2,000 head as compensation for emotional distress. When the news spread, the entire camp erupted. Soldiers and herdsmen cheered and howled with excitement. The air buzzed with a lively atmosphere of, "We've struck it rich." A few days later, when the Tiger Guard returned, escorting that dense black mass of 100,000 head of livestock stretching as far as the eye could see, moving slowly like mountains, the atmosphere in the camp was completely ignited, reaching a fever pitch, especially the Han tribe soldiers and civilians who had remained at the camp. They had never seen such a sight. Seeing the overwhelming tide of cattle, sheep, and horses, all now spoils belonging to their own tribe, left them wide-eyed, mouths agape wide enough to fit a fist, almost fainting with happiness. With the Tiger Guard's triumphant return, the caravan's safe arrival, and the immense spoils, the next step was the standard procedure: hold a victory banquet and reward merits. Those with merit would be promoted and rewarded financially. The families of the fallen would receive generous compensation. Cattle and sheep were slaughtered. Soldiers feasted on large chunks of meat and drank big bowls of wine. The entire army was rewarded. The aroma of roasting meat hung over the Han tribe's new city camp for days, making the nearby wolves howl with craving, holding nightly, sniffing gatherings outside the camp. You paid particular attention to rewarding merit and compensating the fallen. Whether an army could fight depended on discipline as its skeleton, and fair rewards and punishments as its soul. You knew full well that before demanding soldiers obey discipline and fight bravely, the leadership had to do its part properly, maintaining impartiality, rewarding generously where due, and never hesitating to punish when necessary. Hearing that merits were to be rewarded, the returning soldiers of the Tiger Guard were flushed and red-necked with excitement, their eyes shining, risking life and limb. Wasn't this what most of them fought for? Wei Dongliang quickly compiled and reported the soldiers' meritorious deeds. After careful review, you made the decisions immediately. Merits were recorded by combat squad. Any squad that had accumulated enough merit for one rank, the entire squad was promoted one rank in nobility. Those who hadn't quite earned a full rank yet needn't be discouraged. Their merits were recorded in their files, to be combined with future deeds for later rewards. This time, besides the land grants corresponding to rank promotions for most, you also gave all the Tiger Guard soldiers a bonus of sheep, 10 plump goats per person. Families of the fallen were priority recipients. Besides receiving all standard compensations according to policy, they received an extra 20 goats, totaling 30. Why goats? That was thanks to Ling Feng's earlier explanation. He had said goats grazed too aggressively, were picky eaters, and even dug up roots. They were little experts in grassland desertification. Hearing that, you thought, right, we can't be doing something so short-sighted like killing the goose that lays the golden eggs and destroying the ecosystem. The tens of thousands of captured goats were perfect for distributing as benefits. Whether the soldiers took them back to their home tribes to slaughter for meat, improving their diet, or raised them themselves was up to them. Anyway, once on Han tribe territory, there was plenty of straw for feed, ensuring they wouldn't harm the grasslands further. The bodies of the fallen soldiers were carefully treated with lime and then solemnly transported back to their native places for burial by large boats. Fortunately, the Han tribe's current territory wasn't excessively large, so this didn't require too much effort. As for the compensation for the martyrs' families, you considered it even more thoroughly. Besides a fixed monthly martyrs' pension of 10 coins, enough to support the children until adulthood, all fallen soldiers were posthumously granted one rank of nobility, inherited by their eldest son. Added to the 30 goats, this was enough for the widows and children to significantly improve their diet. They could eat the meat, drink goat milk, shear wool, and even sell newborn lambs for money. Even without the pension, those goats alone could ensure a family had enough food and clothing, not to mention the land they had already been allocated. Considering that martyr families had lost a primary laborer, you added a heartwarming policy. When martyr families needed to borrow draft animals for farm work, they could borrow cattle or horses from the local government-run livestock station free of charge. Furthermore, you guaranteed priority service. They could borrow upon arrival, with absolutely no delays. Their worries about the future had to be taken care of, plain and simple. When this series of sincere and substantial compensation policies was announced, morale in the army instantly shot up. The already impressive-looking Han soldiers now stood even taller, chests puffed out, their spirits leveling up directly from gold to diamond tier. You could see the difference. In their eyes, such a good effect was actually quite normal. Compensation is solace for the families of the dead, a guarantee for the livelihood of the martyrs' orphans, but more importantly, it's for the living to see. If one man falls in battle and his family receives such generous compensation, with the chief even implementing policies to resolve future worries, which soldier wouldn't get the message? On the future battlefield, who wouldn't howl as they charged forward, fighting desperately for the Han tribe? After handling these matters, there remained a large number of horses, cattle, and sheep. A portion of the strong, healthy cattle and horses were selected and sent back to the Han tribe's homeland to replenish the livestock numbers at various stations and increase the farming and transport capacity of newly developed commanderies and counties. The remaining livestock, mostly a vast number of sheep, you waved your hand and offloaded almost all of them onto the newly submitted herdsmen at an extremely low price, practically giving them away. In exchange, you received the smaller number of cattle and horses they possessed, which were more urgently needed by the Han tribe. The herdsmen were ecstatic. Trading less valuable sheep for so many cattle and horses, this deal was too good to be true. They were all filled with gratitude towards you, feeling that following the Han tribe was truly the right decision. Your thinking was simpler and cruder. Out of a total of 100,000 livestock, cattle and horses accounted for only about 20,000, leaving 80,000 sheep. After setting aside some for rewarding meritorious soldiers and compensating martyr families, there were still over 50,000 left. What was the point of keeping so many sheep? Herd them yourself? You couldn't manage them all even if you worked yourself to death. Slaughter them all for meat? You probably couldn't finish eating them by next year, and they'd just end up rotting. Rather than letting these sheep rot on your hands or continue to graze the grasslands bare, it was better to trade them for the herdsman's cattle and horses. The cattle and horses could be taken back for plowing and pulling carts, perfectly addressing the urgent need for draft power in agricultural development back home. That was truly making the best use of everything. Add to that the gleaming white salt obtained from the Xin tribe. Man, this southern campaign had truly filled your pots and bowls to the brim. Although it was early June by the time you received the news, the matter of selecting the site had actually been dragging on for over a month. Ever since Shou Ya and the Xin chieftain finalized the matter of aid construction on Bamboo Island, the Xin chieftain had, with a wave of his hand, dispatched Elder Zhu to lead Shou Ya all over the island, scouting for a suitable location. Elder Zhu, one of the few pro-Han figures within the Xin tribe, was exceptionally keen on this task. He was curious down to his bones about the Han tribe's seemingly miraculous civil engineering feats, especially the cross-sea bridge Shou Ya had boasted about. While guiding Shou Ya, his mouth never stopped moving. He seized every chance to pester Shou Ya with questions, trying to ferret out the secrets of building houses and bridges. How would Shou Ya know any of this? The engineering knowledge in his head was probably just enough to build an outhouse, but that didn't stop him from opening his mouth and letting fly. He casually picked a few grand projects like the Han tribe digging the Grand Canal or undertaking major water conservancy works, embellished them wildly, and blustered on, leaving Elder Zhu completely bamboozled, his eyes full of bewildered awe. Meanwhile, Shou Ya himself seized the opportunity of this company-paid trip, combined with field investigation, to secretly get down to his real business, meticulously recording the topography, local customs, native products, mineral resources, and anything else he could see across Bamboo Island. jotting it all down in his little notebook. Unfortunately, conditions were limited, and there weren't many places he could wander freely. This long-term outpost for the mission, to put it plainly, was intended as a future pier for maritime trade. Naturally, the location had to be chosen on the coastline closer to the mainland, convenient for ship traffic. Therefore, Shou Ya's activities were largely confined to circling around this stretch of primitive coastline. But the place was utterly deserted, not even a ghost's shadow, pure, natural, and unpolluted. Apart from an abundance of mosquitoes, he couldn't gather any useful information. In the end, Shou Ya had to give up on digging for intelligence and obediently focus solely on selecting the site itself. To engage in maritime trade, the first requirement was a harbor capable of docking large ships. Otherwise, everything else was pointless. And the key factor for a harbor is water depth. To figure out the water depth data for the sea off Bamboo Island's northern shore, this bunch of landlubbers in the mission risked their necks. No boats? No problem. They arranged with the Shin tribe to cut bamboo and build rafts themselves. Then, relying on these crude bamboo rafts, they moved bit by bit along the seemingly endless coastline, employing the most primitive method, tying a heavy object, a lead weight, to a rope, dropping it into the sea, then pulling it up to measure the rope, engaging in manual depth sounding. Elder Zhi was incredibly curious about this strange behavior, which resembled casting nets for fish, often trailing alongside them with a face full of question marks. "Han envoy," he'd ask, "what great fish are you angling for? Or are you performing some kind of mysterious sea ritual?" Shou Ya was quite patient with this inquisitive elder. After all, he still hoped to pry some information out of him. So, while pretending to measure earnestly, he enthusiastically explained, "Elder, you misunderstand. We're not fishing. We're measuring how deep the seawater is along the shore here. See? We use the rope to lower this heavy thing until it hits bottom, then measure how much rope we used. That tells us the depth." Oh, Elder Zhi seemed to only half understand. "Does the depth of the seawater have something to do with choosing your outpost location?" "Of course." Shou Ya nodded vigorously, like pounding garlic. "Elder, as you know, the connection between Bamboo Island and the mainland currently relies on that shadow bridge, which doesn't even exist yet. The transport capacity is frankly abysmal. So our chief's intention is to primarily rely on large ships traveling by water for future trade with the Shin tribe. Shipping, you see," Shou Ya began his educational spiel, "is both fast and carries huge volumes. The cargo of one large ship can equal that of several hundred horse carts. For long-distance trade, it's far more cost-effective than trudging along land routes." Elder Zhi's eyes lit up. "Then, what if our cross-sea bridge gets built? The kind you mentioned, a super bridge where several large carts can travel side by side at once. Can even that not compare to ships?" "No, absolutely not," Shou Ya stated decisively. Seeing the deepening confusion in Elder Zhi's eyes, he had no choice. But to elaborate, land transport relies on ox carts and horse carts. No matter how impressive the cart or how many wheels it has, it still needs animals to pull it. From the Han tribe lands to here is thousands of li. That takes several months to travel. Just the cost of grain and fodder for the animals along. The way is enormous. And crucially, how much cargo can one trip even carry? Plus, you constantly have to find roads suitable for carts. It's a hassle. But ships are different. Shou Ya grew more animated as he spoke. Rivers, lakes, seas, those are all ready-made highways. Build a ship large enough, and it can carry over 1,000 people at once. Think about it. How many can a horse cart carry? And if you're loading cargo, you can stuff even more in. Cargo doesn't need to eat, drink, or relieve itself. As long as the ship doesn't sink, you can cram stuff in like crazy. Most importantly, Shou Ya lowered his voice conspiratorially, ships run mainly on wind. You know wind, right? A gift from Old Man Heaven. It's free. Just the savings on draft animals and fodder alone cuts the cost dramatically. Elder Zhi listened, his eyes gleaming, utterly captivated. His mind was now filled with images of the Han tribe's miracle ships, capable of carrying mountain loads, of goods needing no food or water, requiring no one to push or pull them, running on water powered solely by the wind. They sounded like divine artifacts. He tried hard to picture these miracle ships, but no matter how he tried, the image that kept surfacing in his mind was the bamboo raft beneath the envoy members right before his eyes, just a super-duper humongous version of it. Elder Zhu quickly shook his head, banishing the unreliable image. Based on his impression of the Han tribe as high-tech and sophisticated, they would never build something so low-tech. Besides, a bamboo raft couldn't be powered by wind. Han envoy, Elder Zhu asked, rubbing his hands together eagerly, his eyes fervent. Then, does our Xin tribe have any chance of building those miracle ships you described? Would the Han tribe be willing to help us? Shou Ya's heart skipped a beat. Here it comes, he thought inwardly, right on cue. He hesitated for a moment, then finally shook his head. Afraid of causing a misunderstanding that might jeopardize the grand plan of cooperation, he patiently began a new round of persuasion. Elder Zhu, building ships isn't just a matter of hammering things together. Take our Han tribe's most common, three-masted sailing ship, for instance. That thing, Shou Ya began his performance. First, you need to send countless strong laborers deep into old-growth forests to fell towering ancient trees that take centuries to grow. After bringing them back, you have to find a place to season the timber for several years until it's completely dry. Then, you need a super-advanced, large-scale lumber mill, equipped with all sorts of metal tools, sharp enough to cut iron like mud, to precisely shape those massive timbers. Just having wood isn't enough. You also need vast quantities of iron and steel components, right? That involves mining, smelting, metalworking, a whole other massive undertaking. Once the materials are ready, you need masters skilled in mathematics, and navigation to design the blueprints, and countless experienced carpenters and blacksmiths working their fingers to the bone. And that's not all. Shou Ya counted on his fingers. The ropes and canvas used on the ship require specialized techniques for cultivating plant fibers, harvesting and processing them, plus top-notch weaving skills. Just the sails for one three-masted ship require hundreds of different looms and thousands of female weavers working without rest for many days to produce. In short, Shou Ya concluded, shipbuilding isn't something a single department or craft can handle. It's the pinnacle of our Han tribe's overall manufacturing capability. It's the largest form of transport we can create, requiring the collective strength of our entire tribe. In other words, Shou Ya revealed his true point, playing his trump card. Elder Zhu, your Xin tribe wants to build ships? Well, first, you'd need a tribe as great as our Han tribe. Elder Zhu was utterly stunned by these words, completely petrified on the spot. Just to build a ship required so much terrifying technology. It seemed to encompass almost every manufacturing process he knew, but all those sophisticated things, the Xin tribe had none of them. Build ships? How on earth could they? Just as Shou Ya had implied, was it ships the Xin tribe lacked? No, what they lacked was a great tribe capable of building ships. Of course, Shou Ya's words contained some exaggeration, perhaps more than a little. But the general thrust was correct. Shipbuilding was indeed a super complex systems engineering task. Even if they managed to build one by sheer luck, without advanced navigation techniques, it would be little more than an ornament. This kind of technology was truly beyond the Xin tribe's capabilities at their current stage. Shou Ya's reason for speaking so definitively was also simple: to completely crush any notion the Xin tribe might have had about getting into shipbuilding. Shou Yi's internal monologue. Just stick to building your cross-sea bridge, buddy. You can have anything in your dreams. Ships? Is something that high-tech something you guys can touch? Just obediently let the Han tribe monopolize maritime trade. Isn't that a sweet deal? Perhaps the Xin tribe didn't think it was sweet at all. But that didn't matter. All that mattered was that the Han tribe thought it was. And so, under the barrage of Elder Zhu's persistent 100,000 whys, Shou Ya and his mission painstakingly spent over a month turning the entire northern shore of Bamboo Island upside down. Finally, he narrowed it down to 3 promising candidate locations. However, Shou Ya didn't dare make the final decision himself. Instead, he carefully compiled topographic maps and hydrographic data for these 3 sites, along with all the intelligence he had gathered on the Xin tribe, much of it new information, not previously known, wrote it all up in a long letter, and dispatched someone to deliver it post-haste into your hands, leaving the final decision to you, the great chief. Right now, what you held in your hands was this weighty, long letter. It contained not only detailed information on the 3 candidate sites, but also the latest intelligence on the Xin tribe, gathered by Shou Ya at the risk of being exposed as a spy. This collection of information was invaluable for the Han tribe's future strategic planning. All right, Shou Ya wasn't too shabby with his efficiency, delivering 3 sea view property options for the prospective outpost. 2 were located in the territories of the Salt and Food tribes, respectively, while the last one was sandwiched between the Food and Fish tribes. Each had its pros and cons, leaving Shou Ya himself stumped and kicking the ball to you. You sat cross-legged on your own warm kang, a heated brick bed platform, spreading out the few sheets of Shou Ya's, artistic interpretations. No maps alongside the written descriptions, and began to ponder them carefully. The first option, in the Salt tribe's neck of the woods, an open stretch of tidal flats, the view was certainly excellent, flat as a pancake, without even a large boulder to block the wind. The seabed dropped off steeply near the shore, meaning the water was deep enough, over 30 meters at high tide, and still around 10 meters at low tide. The seawater looked pretty clean too, a deep blue, with no troublesome reefs visible on the surface. The shore consisted of coarse sand and small pebbles. Logically, with this depth, not only could our small, shabby boats dock, but even a 10,000-ton behemoth, though you had no idea what one looked like, could probably stop here. But you frowned, sensing things weren't that simple. The reason wasn't anything else but the tidal range. It was ridiculously huge. The horizontal distance between the low and high tide lines, though steep, was over 700 meters wide. Add to that the vertical drop of nearly 20 meters, that's 6 or 7 stories high. Good heavens, how could a port possibly be built here? If the wharf were built at the low tide line, then when the tide came in, whoosh, the entire port would turn into a submarine base. If built at the high tide line, then when the tide went out, the wharf would be like a castle in the air, suspended 20 meters high. How would ships unload cargo, toss it down and pray? Unless they built a floating dock? But given the current level of dark technology possessed by our Han tribe, the difficulty factor of that was comparable to building a Gundam from scratch with bare hands. Basically impossible. Moreover, the surrounding environment was just too shabby. A barren wasteland where birds wouldn't even shit, far from any native villages, with severe soil salinization where nothing grew well. Minerals? None. Trees? Just a few sparse patches of small woods and bamboo groves. In summary, aside from drying salt, it had little development value. Pass. The second potential site was in the northeastern part of Bamboo Island, under the Food tribe's control. The scenery here wasn't bad, nestled between mountains and the sea, shaded by lush green trees. Mountains rose right by the sea, but thankfully they were earthen hills, making construction less difficult. There were plenty of trees too, ancient ones suitable for making coffin boards. Several Food tribe villages were nearby, giving it a populated feel. Although the villagers had been chopping wood for generations, the trees grew faster than they could cut, so the forests remained quite dense. Most crucially, there was a freshwater river over 20 meters wide at the foot of the mountain. The folks in the surrounding villages relied on it for irrigating their fields and for drinking water. Beyond the small coastal hills lay a plain, through which the freshwater river meandered eastward. As for the coastal conditions, the old problem reappeared. The tidal range was still immense. Fortunately, there weren't many reefs in the bay and the water depth was sufficient. You were quite tempted by this location. It had earthen hills, convenient for excavation and infrastructure, fresh water for farming and drinking, and timber for building houses, making furniture, and even trading with the natives for local products. These were all hard currency. However, two drawbacks made you hesitate. First, that deadly tidal range again. Second, those small earthen hills. Abundant earth and trees were good, but they also formed a wall, blocking access to the interior of Bamboo Island. People could walk past easily, but this was meant to be a cargo port. In the future, large quantities of goods would need to be transported inland, requiring the specific construction of roads through the mountains. While not overly difficult, it would be time-consuming and labor-intensive. The final piece of land made your eyes light up. This spot was at the northeastern tip of Bamboo Island, closest to the mainland. What truly captivated you was that this was the estuary of Bamboo Island's large freshwater river. The moment the words freshwater river estuary appeared, you could basically picture the surrounding environment. A wide sandy beach formed by river deposits, with the terrain definitely higher inland and lower towards the sea. Otherwise, where would the water flow? Looking at the surrounding powers and topography, to the east of the headland was the Cliff Mountain area, mentioned in Shou Ya's letter, full of steep stone cliffs, though there were also lower areas suitable for building a port. To the west of the headland lay an inland river plain, with densely packed farmland and clustered villages along both banks, a highly populated area. This location was perfectly situated on the border between the food and fish tribes' territories. Building a port here offered numerous advantages. 1. People. It would be convenient to recruit local natives as cheap labor. Moreover, this was a major settlement area for the food tribe, with a population of several thousand, almost rivaling one of our Han tribe's commanderies. 2. The food tribe primarily engaged in farming, making them colleagues of a sort with our Han tribe. Finding common ground and establishing good relations shouldn't be difficult. Both you and Shou Ya were confident about this. 3. The neighboring fish tribe should also be easy to deal with. They lived hard lives. If we offered them some small benefits later, we could easily pull them into our sphere as subordinates, and incidentally gain another customer. A win-win situation. The topography of the entire headland was also quite suitable. The west side featured the sandy beach and river mouth, with flat terrain. The downside was that the coastal mudflats were too wide, muddy, and difficult to traverse, almost like a swamp, with quite a few mangrove trees growing there. But these weren't deal-breakers. They could be artificially modified later by compacting the foundation. On the eastern side, Cliff Mountain had numerous offshore reefs and small islands. The larger ones were about the size of a small school playground, while the smaller ones were perhaps the size of a living room. Most of these islands and reefs had solid rock bases. At low tide, some looked like enormous stone pillars poking out of the sea. This was exactly what you liked most. Don't underestimate these solitary little islands and reefs. They weren't large, but they were incredibly useful. They were practically natural platforms for cannons and lighthouse foundations. Imagine building several giant lighthouses on those towering reefs, equipping them with rotating Fresnel lens searchlights, and hanging large bells and horns. At night or in heavy fog, the lights would sweep around, the bells would clang, gong, gong, and the horns would wail, woo woo, guiding lost ships and ensuring their safe return home. Furthermore, building the port at the river mouth meant that Cliff Mountain to the southeast would act as a natural breakwater, blocking large ocean waves and creating a sheltered harbor. This could significantly reduce losses for both fishermen and our merchant fleets. As for inland transport, if that large river was navigable, we could load goods onto smaller boats and travel upstream, selling wares to every nook and cranny of Bamboo Island. After all, humans have always preferred living near water since ancient times, so this waterway distribution plan seemed highly feasible. Now, only the last and most vexing problem remained: That damnably, ridiculously large tidal range. How exactly should the port be built? This third location was perfect in every other way, practically a geomantically auspicious spot tailor-made for you. But if this port construction problem couldn't be solved, everything else was moot. You started scratching your head, completely baffled. Why was the tidal range here 15 to 20 meters? That's as high as a 6 or 7-story building. A port here would be incredibly difficult. Could it be? Because this blasted place has 2 moons, double the gravity so the tides go wild too. An unreliable thought suddenly popped into your head, and the more you considered it, the more it seemed to have a sliver of logic. However, even if the moons were truly to blame, you didn't have the ability to shoot one down. That was insane. In the end, you had to buckle down and figure out a solution related to the port itself. Having mulled over the 3-choice dilemma presented by Shou Ya, you had a plan. With a flourish of your brush, you clearly outlined the final site selection. In construction strategy, sending it back post-haste to Shou Ya, instructing him to proceed and call for backup if he encountered difficulties. With the overseas branch base settled, you turned your attention back to developing the home front. It was now early June, and good news arrived. The Jiang clan had finished harvesting their first half-year's millet crop. The entire tribe was packed and ready to move and join you at any moment. Upon hearing this, you immediately had Weishan Commandery organize a fleet to pick them up, and notified the commanderies and counties along the route. Get the bedding ready, the new neighbors are arriving soon. Stuff the entire Jiang clan into. One place to establish a county? You weren't that foolish. Overly powerful clans were hard to manage. Your calculation was this: let them land in Weishan Commandery, leave some behind. When they reach Liuyang Commandery, leave some more. Then Ruyang Commandery, leave yet more. The remaining people would be brought to Hanyang Commandery to rest. As for the Jiang clan's upper echelon and their immediate families, they would all stay in Hanyang City, right under your nose. This way, with the leadership personally suppressed by you, and the clansmen scattered like pepper across various locations, rootless, what trouble could these few leading families possibly stir up? However, you didn't plan on waiting idly in Hanyang City. Instead, you took a step ahead and slipped over to Weishan Commandery, ostensibly to guide the work, but actually to inspect the prisoner of war camp and, incidentally, see if You Zhi, whom you had exiled here, had been slacking off recently. You Zhi, the administrator of Weishan Commandery, had been pulling out all the stops lately. Back then he had thumped his chest, guaranteeing you 50,000 people in exchange for the administrator's seat. You had nodded, but more than a year had passed, and he still hadn't gathered enough people. At the end of last year, you gave him an ultimatum to step up his headhunting, simultaneously conscripting a large batch of soldiers from Weishan Commandery and transferring more than half its population to Xingang Commandery for construction projects. Well, now, the entire Weishan Commandery, apart from a few technical experts, had been practically stripped bare by you. Seeing the large commandery he had painstakingly built up shrink smaller than a county town, how could You Zhi sit still? He had no choice but to once again rev up his nearly overheating brain, racking his thoughts and using every kind of sugar-coated bullet to coax native tribes from along the Great Lake shore to immigrate. Now, half a year later, hey, it was actually showing some results. This was partly thanks to the assets you had left behind. The people were transferred away, but the houses and land remained. You Zhi used these ready-made houses and plots, plus the promotional slogan, "Come be a Han tribesman, good food and drink guaranteed," to successfully attract quite a few surrounding wild tribes to join. You had no objections to You Zhi's method of throwing money to attract people. As long as it increased the Han tribe's population, you didn't care what tactics he used. Newcomers getting free new houses might seem unfair to the older residents. No matter. What goes around comes around. Before long, these newcomers would also have to roll up their sleeves and build houses for the next wave. The advantages they enjoyed now would have to be repaid twofold in the future. You walked alongside You Zhi on the streets of Weishan Commandery. Seeing the bustling crowds in the city, it did have a certain air of prosperity. You asked casually, "You Zhi, how many people does Weishan Commandery have now?" Hearing this, You Zhi instinctively shuddered, his face instantly falling. He pleaded in a tearful tone, "Chief, my dear Chief, there aren't many people left, really not many. Please, please don't transfer any more people. These are the ones I barely managed to coax. Ah, no, recruit." Your face was as thick as a city wall. You paid his reaction no mind and feigned displeasure. "Who said anything about transferring people? I'm just asking for the numbers. What, as the great chief, I can't even know how many people are in my own territory? Cut the crap and report the numbers." "Ah, oh. Yunjai eyed you suspiciously for a moment before hesitantly speaking. "At the end of last year, there were still over 20,000 people in the commandery. Before the year ended, you conscripted soldiers and a batch left. At the beginning of this year, you moved migrants to Xingang Commandery, and more than half left again. By spring this year, the population had dropped to less than 5,000. These past 6 months, I've worked myself to the bone and only managed to recruit just over 10,000 new people. So right now, the total is probably around 17,000 or so. Slaves aren't included. That previous batch of slaves was also transferred by you to Xingang Commandery and Lakeheart Island for infrastructure projects." At this point, Yunji changed the subject, asking cautiously, "Oh, right, Chief. I have a batch of newly arrived steppe prisoners of war here. Over 3,000 people, just mostly women and children. I was actually meaning to ask you, how should these people be arranged?" You nodded. The numbers matched what you had privately learned. Hearing him ask about the prisoners' arrangement, you shot him an expressionless sideways glance. "What? You have ideas about this batch of prisoners?" Yunji scratched the back of his head sheepishly, chuckled, and asked tentatively, "Chief, as you know, our Weishan Commandery has many new immigrants. When registering households, quite a few are still single men without official wives. This isn't easy to manage, and it affects social stability, doesn't it? So... He didn't finish, but his meaning was perfectly clear. He wanted some women to pair up with the bachelors. You actually became a bit curious. The newly arrived tribes are short of women? That shouldn't be right. I thought the risk of men dying while hunting and whatnot would be higher. How could there be more men than women?" "Chief, you don't know," Yunji quickly explained. "Nowadays, along the Great Lake, many tribes have actually started farming, growing some wild rice from the swamps, sweet sorghum, things like that. Fewer rely purely on hunting, so men aren't dying off so easily. Conversely, women face high risks during childbirth, and the mortality rate hasn't come down." "Oh, so that's how it is," you realized, then immediately shifted gears. "But there aren't that many female captives in total anyway. How many do you plan to ask for? I can't leave them all here for you." "Well," Yunji rubbed his hands, tentatively, holding up his fingers. "At least half, perhaps. There were over 3,000 steppe captives seized this time. Fewer than 500 were able-bodied adult males. The rest were the old, weak women and children. You had already lumped the nearly grown teenage boys in with the adult male captives for miscellaneous labor. By this calculation, the remaining captives were primarily adult women, numbering around 800, plus a bunch of toddlers under 5, mostly boys, and girls of various ages. Yunji asking for half meant about 400 adult women. 400 people, not too many, not too few. But this could solve the lifelong bachelorhood problem for 400 men, forming 400 new families capable of paying taxes and bearing children. By that math, it was a worthwhile deal. You immediately made the decision. Fine, half it is. But you have to make it clear to those bachelors, if they take a woman, they must also raise the children she brings with her. No looking down on them. That's the condition. As for the remaining people, I have other plans." You paused, suddenly remembering something else. "Right, where's that kid, You Zhi? Where did he run off to? Still not back? Your expectations for Yu Fu were simple. Have him quickly board a ship, follow the Luyang River eastward, and drift all the way to its end, based on the residual geographical knowledge in your mind. Such a large river would, 9 times out of 10, eventually lead to the Great Sea. Once he found the sea, he could explore along the coastline and discover the sea route to Bamboo Island. Of course, you weren't expecting Yu Fu to suddenly embark on some round-the-world voyage. That wasn't realistic. Our Han tribe's current shipbuilding technology and navigation skills were only sufficient for puttering around inland rivers. Technological development had to proceed step by step, especially with something like seafaring. Trying to leapfrog ahead just because you were a transmigrator? That could be a blessing or a curse for the current Han tribe. Unfortunately, Yu Fu clearly hadn't grasped your profound strategic intent. His mind held only one rigid command: follow the river downstream until he couldn't go any further. Where was the end? Yu Fu didn't know. In his simple worldview, the word end was probably as mystical as the ends of the earth. But where exactly the ends of the earth were, he had even less of a clue. He had even foolishly asked you back then, "Chief, does this Luyang River truly have an end? What does the end look like? How will I know if I've arrived?" That question had stumped you. Truth be told, you hadn't seen what the ocean looked like in this world either. However, since the Shin tribe on Bamboo Island could use seawater to make salt, the seawater must be salty. That much had to be true, right? So, you had bluffed him at the time. The end of the Luyang River is the sea. That place is countless times larger than our lake here. Water stretches as far as the eye can see. The most important sign is the seawater is salty. It contains inexhaustible amounts of salt. Endless salt. Yu Fu still remembered how, upon hearing those words, he was so excited he nearly jumped up on the spot. Salt. In this era, it was hard currency, the lifeblood, a treasure that could be exchanged for wives and territory. If the Han tribe found such a place, wouldn't that be like discovering mountains of gold and silver? They'd be rich, utterly rich, fueled by this grand objective of get rich finding the salt sea. Yu Fu's exploratory voyage was instantly filled with motivation and anticipation. His daily task, besides sailing, was to cup river water in his hands at each new stretch of the river and take a sip, eagerly awaiting the day he'd exclaim, "Wah," after tasting salt water. However, ideals are plump, but reality is bony. Months passed, and not only had he not tasted salt, but he had discovered a city by the riverbank. That's right, a city built with rammed earth, and judging by its scale, it wasn't small. Outside the city walls lay vast expanses of farmland, planted with what looked like dry land crops, such as wheat and millet. The crops in the fields were arranged neatly in rows. This indicated that the people here had mastered fairly decent farming techniques, at least understanding row planting, rather than the most primitive slash-and-burn method of randomly scattering seeds and leaving it to fate. This section of the river was about 300 meters wide. Yu Fu's fleet navigated cautiously in the middle of the river. Standing on the second deck of the flagship, he could clearly see many people busy on the banks, both men and women. Some were casting circular fishing nets, others were pulling a maiwai, long, cage-like object out of the water, while women beside them deftly removed fish from inside. It seemed fishing techniques were quite advanced here. Of course, these fishing methods were still within Yu Fu's realm of understanding. Our Han tribe had done similar things. What truly made him widen his eyes and click his tongue in amazement was another peculiar fishing method. From afar, on the water near the bank, some people poled bamboo rafts, while a few others paddled. Dugout canoes, the kind made by hollowing out a single tree trunk, not our advanced assembled types. One person poled the raft or paddled the canoe, while another stood on it, directing a dozen or so dark water birds. Those birds were incredibly clever, periodically plunging into the water with a plop. When they resurfaced, they'd have a wriggling fish in their beaks. They spat the fish onto the raft, and then stood alertly on the edge again, staring at the water, ready for the next hunt. Yu Fu was astonished. He had always thought small birds like chickens and ducks were rather dim-witted, unlike oxen and horses which had enough sense to be trained as helpers. Yet this tribe before him could actually train water birds into fishing assistants. This completely overturned his worldview. It was simply miraculous. However, just as Yu Fu was marveling at their bird-taming skills, the laboring fisherfolk on the bank and the fishermen on the raft saw Yu Fu's few tall and imposing sailing ships, and their jaws nearly hit the ground in shock. They had never seen such enormous rafts in their lives, and they didn't need anyone poling or paddling. They could move on the water by themselves. Those huge canvases billowed like small hills. Could it be that these things were pushed along by the water current? Otherwise, why were they drifting down from upstream? Both sides were stunned by the other's black technology. For a moment, an eerie silence fell over the river. People stared wide-eyed at each other across the distance of several hundred meters, no one daring to initiate contact. "Commander," the captain of Yu Fu's flagship sidled over and asked quietly, "Should we move closer for a look? This is a city. Looks like quite a few people. Thanks to your cheat code as a transmigrator, the Han tribe's shipbuilding industry had developed at rocket speed. With more ships, professional sailors became highly sought after. Every time a new ship was launched, a large number of recruits had to be added. Consequently, the promotion speed for experienced sailors was incredibly fast. Being a sailor had arguably become one of the most desirable occupations in the Han tribe. Of course, just one of. In the Han tribe, as long as you had a skill, you wouldn't worry about going hungry. Once life stabilized, people's ambitions stirred. Spurred by the meritocracy and nobility system you established, those with full bellies and idle time thought more about how to achieve merits, gain an official position, and bring glory to their ancestors. Every trade had its own promotion channels, and sailing was no exception. Getting into Yu Fu's long-range exploration group was like getting a foot in the door to earning merit, although it meant being far from home, enduring hardships aboard the ship, traveling to unfamiliar wild lands, and risking decapitation every time they encountered a strange tribe. Earning merit wasn't supposed to be easy, was it? High risk meant high reward, especially first contact missions like being the first to establish relations with an unknown tribe. The merits were substantial. Hadn't they seen a few unlucky fellows in last year's fleet perish during encounters with savage tribes? Yet they were posthumously awarded 2 ranks of nobility. Even if they couldn't enjoy it themselves, their sons could inherit. Even if your rules stipulated that titles decreased with each generation, it was still a title, wasn't it? Therefore, whenever the exploration group encountered an unknown tribe along the way, the crew members scrambled for the chance to go ashore and communicate. Successfully establishing relations with a tribe meant a mark in the merit book. Encountering a tribe with a huge city like this one was a first for them in their 2 voyages. If one could secure this first contact mission and connect with this large tribe, it would definitely be a major entry in the merit book. The flagship captain's heart was also itching intensely, which was why he couldn't resist volunteering, wanting to go ashore and chat with those city folk. Yu Fu observed the activity on the shore, pondered for a moment, and said, "Don't rush to shore just yet. Lower the sails, drop anchor, and hold the ship steady. You'll see, someone on the shore has definitely run back to the city to report. Let's wait first, see if anyone in charge comes out." The flagship captain heard this and thought it made sense. Rushing over rashly would likely only allow contact with a few ordinary fishermen, not their leaders, which wouldn't be of much use to the Han tribe. Furthermore, Yu Fu had an unspoken concern. Who knew how the locals would react to these visitors from beyond? Would they be friendly or hostile? They would find out soon enough by seeing who came out. If a large group of armed, burly men emerged aggressively, the risk of contact would be too high. They'd have to proceed cautiously. If the locals were also curious and wanted to make contact, that would be a different scenario. With the situation unclear, it was best to lie low for now and observe. Thus, the flagship signaled, and the few large sailing ships furled their sails, dropped anchor, and came to a steady stop in the middle of the wide river. Seeing this, the people on the shore immediately stirred again. Some hastily gathered their fishing gear, preparing to flee. Those fishing from rafts quickly dragged them ashore. Several more people sprinted towards the city, presumably to report the latest development. Those giant water monsters had stopped. Sure enough, before long, a group emerged from the direction of the city gate. This group clustered around a woman. Judging by her attire, she seemed to be a person of importance, wearing a yellow cotton robe. Someone led the way in front of her, pointing at the fleet in the middle of the river while chattering away, gesturing animatedly, looking very excited. "Commander, look! People are coming out of the city. The one in the long robe must be the important person you mentioned. Hey, she doesn't seem to have brought soldiers. She walked to the riverbank alone." Along the ship's railing, a group of bored sailors craned their necks, pointing at the scene on shore, excitedly discussing the other tribes' clothing, customs, and way of life. Especially the women's attire, which was the focus of their gossip. Standing there alone doesn't look like they're going to make a move, Yu Fu quickly assessed. Seems the other side is also interested in contacting us. All right, who wants to be the first diplomat and go say hello? The moment he finished speaking, the ship erupted. "Commander, I'll go. I'm tough, not afraid." Me, take me. I'm quick-witted. Stop fighting. I row fast. Whoever goes, I have to ferry them." Seeing the enthusiastic volunteers, Yu Fu didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He waved his hand. All right, stop fighting. This time the other party is a large tribe. We need to pay attention to etiquette. Can't be too casual. We'll take the landing craft over. Just reach the riverbank. Absolutely no going ashore. Yu Fu emphasized. Offer some gifts to show friendliness. No need for deep interaction for now. Just ask if they're willing to trade with us, and maybe inquire about any local specialties. Nothing else major. We still need to continue downstream. Finding that saltwater lake the chief mentioned is the real priority. Hearing this, everyone understood. Oh, so this time it was just delivering gifts and greetings. Still, representing the Han tribe to interact with such a large tribe was an honor. In the end, the flagship captain took the lead, selected a few sharp sailors, changed into the Han tribe's formal official attire, cap, sash, and robes, looking quite impressive. They prepared a pile of carefully chosen gifts, and then cautiously rowed the landing craft towards the shore. On the bank, Tang Ji's people saw a small boat detach from the Han tribe's ship and head straight towards them. They immediately grew tense, forming a protective circle around Tang Ji, fearing these visitors from beyond harbored ill intentions. However, they didn't have much time to be nervous. The large sailing ships were only about 100 meters offshore, within bowshot range. The small boat rowed over quickly, and in the blink of an eye the landing craft stopped in the water a few meters from the bank. Seeing the strangely dressed odd people up close, the people on shore became even more tense, several directly shielding Tang Ji with their bodies. The leading flagship captain was clearly an old hand, unfazed by such scenes. Calmly, he stood at the bow, cupped his hands in salute towards Tang Ji on the shore, and spoke loudly, accompanied, of course, by exaggerated gestures. Respected friend, we are merchants from the Han tribe traveling from upstream. We seek the legendary Great Sea downstream. Passing through your esteemed territory, we specially offer a small token gift, hoping to trade for some food and drink to replenish our supplies. Would that be possible? Of course. The captain changed his tone, gesturing towards the gifts on the boat. If you have any fine goods here, we are also willing to exchange our treasures for them. As the captain spoke, he gestured, pointing individually at the gifts, held by his subordinates, indicating they were all for them. Finally, he pointed to his own mouth and stomach, signaling his desire to trade for food. Most people on the shore understood. Oh, so they weren't here to fight or seize territory, but to trade, to exchange things for food. That was easy to understand. Everyone instantly relaxed, the tense atmosphere easing considerably. After all, the Tang tribe itself was quite developed. In handicrafts, capable of producing their own cloth, grain, salt, pottery, and metal utensils. When they had surpluses, they also sold them to surrounding smaller tribes or scattered wild folk. They were no strangers to trade. It was just that they were usually the sellers. Being the buyers this time felt slightly unfamiliar. Tang Ji didn't speak immediately but gave a slight nod, signaling her people to go and receive the gifts. The Han tribe sailors strictly followed Yu Fu's orders, resolutely staying off the shore. Standing very properly in the boat, they passed the gifts one by one to the people who came to receive them. Although they knew inwardly that in this kind of one-sided gift-giving trade, their side would surely take a small loss, there was no choice. How could they catch a big fish without first scattering some bait and befriending the other party? Meanwhile, Tang Ji and her tribespeople were utterly stunned when they saw the gifts presented by the Han tribe. They couldn't help but gasp, their eyes wide. In their view, these items were simply priceless treasures. First were the ceramic wares. There were bowls, plates, and saucers coated in smooth white glaze, and even small decorative items like ceramic lamps and brush washers. The most valuable was a set of 5-color teaware. The porcelain first had a layer of shimmering base glaze. Then drawings were painted on top, using mineral pigments of 5 different colors. And finally, it was meticulously fired. This was the masterpiece of the Han tribe's top master potter, Cripple, or rather the official kiln team he led. Now consider the Tang tribe's own pottery level. Their best technique was still stuck at the red pottery with black decoration stage, a red pottery base with black patterns painted on top. At best, they could manage 3 color patterns. Compared to these Han tribe ceramics, gleaming, with a glassy luster and vibrant colors, it was like comparing mud clods to fine jade, completely different dimensions. Next were the textiles, a roll of plain hemp cloth, a bolt of brilliantly colored brocade, and a bolt of snow-white plain silk. The moment these 3 treasures were revealed, the surrounding crowd let out a collective wow of amazement. The Tang tribe also had hemp cloth, but feeling the Han tribe's hemp, then looking at their own, the smoothness, the density, there was simply no comparison. However, the Tang people didn't usually wear much hemp clothing, finding it coarse. They primarily wore cotton. The cotton they grew was similar to the cotton melon the Tiger Guard had discovered earlier, and it was already widespread, with cultivation areas much larger than hemp. Cotton could not only be woven into cloth but also used for padded jackets, trousers, and quilts, making it much more practical than hemp fiber. But when they unfolded the Han tribe's 2 bolts of silk brocade, cotton instantly lost its appeal. They felt this was something only celestial beings could weave. The colored brocade was thick and dense, woven with colorful patterns. The overall color scheme was the blue-green of peacock feathers, interspersed with yellow, red, brown, and cyan. The pattern depicted 100 birds paying homage to the phoenix, a green forest, a clear waterfall, and countless colorful small birds flying amidst the trees, each rendered lifelike. The other bolt of plain silk, though pure white, was thin as cicada wings, light as mist. Holding it, one could barely feel its weight. It was ethereal, full of otherworldly grace. The killer feature was that the Han tribe now primarily raised chestnut silkworms, whose silk had an exceptionally high reflectivity. It shimmered. Even at night, with just a little light, it could reflect dazzlingly. That's why the Han people privately called it glowing fabric. It was currently morning, the sun bright. As the 2 bolts of silk, one plain, one colored, were unfurled before the crowd, the fine weave, the vibrant colors, the reflective effect like an inherent holy light, everyone was dumbfounded. Even Tang Ji, usually well-informed and steady as an old dog, was dazzled by the treasures before her, momentarily losing focus. The gasps of her surrounding tribespeople brought her back to reality. Taking a deep breath, she forced herself to remain calm, quickly had the silks and cloth put away, and continued examining the other gifts. Besides the ceramics and silks, the high-end luxury goods, the rest were small trinkets. 2 carved wooden boxes were opened. One contained a knife and a sword, both short like daggers. The sheaths were made of ordinary ironwood, the hilts of common ram's horn. The design was somewhat unique, but the materials were indeed ordinary. Still, they were forged from steel, which was decent enough. The other small box held a sewing kit, a pair of shiny scissors, a measuring tape, several spools of colored thread, a block of dry powder, presumably for marking lines, and steel needles of various sizes. The last, slightly larger box contained the Han tribe's 4 treasures of the study: brush, inkstick, paper, and inkstone, a complete set. Beside them lay 2 books, one titled Han Writes, the other Selected Poems. These items weren't exquisitely packaged, but they weren't gifts just any tribe would receive. For small tribes that couldn't even farm, Yu Fu usually just gave hard currency, like salt, cloth, iron pots, or pottery bowls. But this time was different. Seeing the Tang tribe's large city, endless fields, and numerous people, Yu Fu knew they wouldn't be impressed by ordinary things. He had to present something with cultural significance to make an impact, like books. Of course, printed books themselves weren't the main point. The key was the characters written in them. That represented the level of civilization, as expected. When Tang Ji took the 2 thread-bound, horizontally printed books, smelling faintly of ink, out of the box and casually flipped one open, she froze. Her expression was even more shocked than when she saw the dazzling brocade. Her fingers trembled as she flipped through them twice, then started again from the beginning, carefully reading character by character. She pointed at the square characters on the page, scrutinizing them, seemingly discerning some patterns. She noticed that among these peculiar symbols, characters, many were repeated, looking exactly the same. Although she had no idea what these symbols meant, simply observing this systematic repetition was highly beneficial to her. Coincidentally, ever since Tang Ji had led the Tang tribe towards prosperity and stability, she had also been trying to organize, optimize, and supplement the Tang tribe's existing scattered, unsystematic writing, possibly pictures or symbols. But the task of creating characters was truly not something an ordinary person could do. Having tried it herself, Tang Ji knew how difficult it was. Now, seeing the Han tribe's systematic, beautifully printed writing and books was like rain after a long drought for her, providing immense inspiration. Looking at the material of the books, thin, flexible paper, and the clear, neat printing, this was far superior to the writing the Tang tribe still used, carved onto turtle shells, animal bones, or bamboo and wooden slips. Such a small book from the Han tribe could record so much information, and it was so convenient to flip through. Far easier than handling those heavy, fragile turtle shells or cumbersome bamboo and wooden slips.